We have had lower exports in the United States, but the market's trading higher ending the week. Jerry Gidel is ready to discuss right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, we have this week with corn and soybeans trading higher. What's the reason for that?
Well, I think the world's continues to be on the nervous order here about what kind of prospects there might be in South America. We've had various uh, people reduce their numbers, not huge, not big adjustments down to 145 or something like that on soybeans in Brazil, but uh, there's different opinions of maybe Rio Grande is going to save the world down there and compensate for the issues of Mato Grosso and Goiás and things like that. And then, but on the other side of the coin here, uh, the the U.S. weather situation has been surprisingly warm in February. It's been above normal through the first half of the month. There's some talk that we might slow down a little bit in the second half of the U.S. March, but at this point, at least, I think there's more and more people getting nervous about what kind of crop season the U.S. is going to have, and we've got a lot of people still short this market, and so I think that's been a factor that's come in here. Looking back at past histories of uh, on the U.S. production, if sometimes the a dry winter and a dry spring can actually get into impacting things. Uh, Along the way, there's been well, 2012 is a big deal. 2010 was kind of there. 2016 had some impacts on that too. We've had other ones though that turned out that was, we've had, like 1996 wasn't as strong the balance of the year, but that's a long ways back. The real issue is here. There's lots of talk about our current El Nino conditions dramatically swinging to La Nina, and that dramatic swings that happen between these Southern Pacific oscillator and that going from well, last year we've had really cold. Excuse me, we had uh, a buildup of El Nino, which is a positive to some extent on precip up this direction, but it's really swinging back the other direction right now. There's lots of that talk, and to some extent, this El Nino has had some impact, as we already know, on Brazil's output in this last 6 months. So, it's definitely a major weather and crop issue that occurs, the swinging of the equatorial water temperatures there in the Pacific that impact our conditions both in South and North America.
Now, before we jump into the US export numbers, from the demand side of things, we have seen more ethanol demand and more demand for protein production.
Yes, we've had some very strong domestic type of activity here. Ethanol had a ding there in January because of cold temperatures, but it's really has bounced back pretty dramatically here at this point. The data that came out here earlier this month showed pretty good recovery here in ethanol uh, output. And then, of course, today we ended up having a surprisingly strong February NOPA crush, which is the updated information from the processing industry, and that the trade was looking for 178 to 180 million bushels, which is a record already being rejected from a couple of years ago. So it was already optimistic about that for the soybeans. And they reported a number of 186.2. So I think that's really falling back to this whole issue of expanded renewable diesel demand. That really is a driving force here in the western U.S. California leading the charge there. Oregon and Washington are kind of in the crowd, but they haven't really put some really hefty demands state by state in those two. But California right now has already got some pretty stiff outlooks on what they need and want, and it all ties into their industry and all that type of thing that they have there in the ports in the West Coast, and they've been the leading force about driving down U.S. auto emissions for decades, and so this is not a unusual demand from the California legislature out there, but that particular feature is going to be a factor here, I think, and what our overall demand is. We tend to pick up a little bit stronger quarterly demand. We had about 570 million in crush last fall. And it looks like right now with this big jump that, by the way, uh, I think it's 172 before, so we're talking about a 14 million increase over the previous record. That really is pushing our total here on crush, probably up to around 70 million, higher this year than we were last year. And the USDA right now currently is only projecting 100 million increase for the whole year. Now, the one thing is we'll probably have maybe a 2 months worth of real strong opportunity here, and that the real twist of it right now is that Argentina is really looking like they're going to be jumping in here dramatically and expanding their uh, soybean crushing industry. That's what they do with that crop down there. Last year, they were curtailed dramatically because of the small crops they had. And so they're going to be interested in moving things, meal and soybean oil into the world markets. Interestingly enough, the soybean meal in the U.S. is going to have to compete in that industry. We can't probably use all this expanded numbers that we're looking at. So, but on the soybean oil side of things, we'll be utilizing most of our oil into that renewable diesel demand on the West Coast. So that's really that data that came out today. It's I think ultimately had an impact. On what the market did by the close, but it took a while from the 11 o'clock announcement till about an hour and a half later before it started to pick back up and get back near unchanged. And we ultimately come back and close a couple cents higher in soybeans. I think because of this very strong data that came out there on the soybean crush from there. But as I mentioned, the ethanol demand also we've always seem to run a little bit further behind on that from both the energy department and the USDA about what's going on there. It looks strong on that on the demand side of things, and I think we'll have no problem in reaching the USDA's projections on corn usage for ethanol. We might actually, in one case here, one of the industry projection or analysts out there was actually talking about maybe that our ethanol demand could move up 100 million from the current estimate. But interestingly enough, when you have a 2.1 billion carryover stock, that just takes you down to 2 billion. So you're not really putting a big dent in it. And the soybeans taking the 315 million down to say 260 or 280 or something like that would be a lot more dynamic.
Now, with regards to the US export numbers going down, how much of a factor is the strength of the US dollar?
Oh, it makes a factor in there. It gives people some conversation in that. From there, uh, I think, well, in this case right now, uh, Argentina, when they were having all their financial problems and that, they couldn't get people. The producers wouldn't sell it. They had to switch over to sell it in U.S. dollars versus their currency, things like that. There's even some rumbles that the current new administration down there, from where President Mealy, was thinking about reverting back to that because things have slowed down again, and they do have a improved crop. Interestingly enough, there was one analyst today that took down 500,000 metric tons, down to 49.5. But geez, 49.5 or 50 million metric tons is a lot better than last year's 25 or 26 million. And to some extent, there was hopes of being 53 or 54 million early in the year, but it looks like the weather has been erratic enough recently, and we even had dryness knocked out some harvested acres here a month or so ago. On the corn side, that particular output over there in Argentina, they stretched their crop out. There's some of it's getting close to being harvested, while there'll be more of it won't be harvested until mid to late June into July. So that crop has still got time to figure out what it's going to be out of that country. But the U.S. Corn exports have continued to be above last year, and we've had pretty solid numbers. The ones that kind of got beat up this week was the soybeans again. They were low, and then they had a decent pop last week, and then they backed off again this week on weekly sales. I just wonder as to uh, the situation in Brazil. If we're talking the USDA's numbers at 155 million metric tons still doesn't really ring true for most traders out there. Do I think it's 145? No, but I think it could be a lot closer to 150 or a little bit below. And that 5 million metric tons, time you put 35 million in there, that's 150, 200 million worth of less output for Brazil, and that so that could still keep things together here on our export demand. But it gets back and forth and choppy and all that type of thing. But we did have a very impressive performance this last week in beans as it kind of continued to move up. And actually, we popped up above $12 here yesterday for about an hour or so. It wasn't very long, but it was up there. But we come back and close near $12 today.
So, what's going to happen ahead of us is that the market is going to start pricing on the new USD report.
Well, that's the interesting feature out here going ahead of us. We've got a couple sets of pretty important information that'll be coming out on March 28th. From there, the stocks positions, quarterly stocks in corn and soybeans and wheat. Wheat's it took a tumble this week. We probably should talk about that before we get too far off it. The late Recently, the Chinese have decided, and actually, that's not just the U.S. They seem to have come back and reduced some of their purchases uh, from Canada, also from Australia, things like that around the world. And so at this point, at least, they've canceled about 18, 19 million of soft red. And that's really back to a interesting situation that developed last summer where the weather during their harvest for soft red was knocked down, pretty dramatically. But I guess they've been able to get enough of that crop together so they didn't need as much as they bought on the world markets after that last fall. From there, but in general, we're still looking at a carryover stock on wheat that's reasonably tight. The key question on wheat going forward this spring will be what kind of weather do we have for the central and southern plains, and that we had this big fire out in Texas that, interestingly, about burning grass off of pasture land and wheat and the top of that actually sometimes turns out to be a blessing in disguise. But I don't think the big question becomes is what kind of moisture we have out in that part of the world. But then let's swing in over to the soybeans and corn here. The stocks reports right now, at least, we're going to have higher numbers than we had a year ago on stocks. Corn, particularly with the big crop we had from last year. On the soybean side, we're probably also going to have slightly higher numbers. I think the numbers on that are about 40 to 60 million higher than they were this time last year, primarily because of the slowdown in exports that we've had. We've had a super crush statistics, as I mentioned before, because we're expanding that. I think we're running up near 800 million bushels on that on a quarterly basis. That's up 25 to 35 million higher as we had back in the fall. So overall, as I said, we're around 70 million ahead of last year's pace on the crush. But in the exports, we slowed down because of the perceived crop of soybeans in South America. We're not completely devastated in Brazil by any means, but it's definitely could be interesting as that crop comes along. Of course, the other big thing that comes out on March 28th. Now, that's an interesting day. It's a Thursday. It's actually the day before we start our U.S. and the world's celebration of the Easter holiday. And so, Good Friday, we're off, and we start trading again then on Sunday night. Uh, could be actually Monday morning, but I haven't seen the update on that just yet. But the so we're going to get that data out on a Thursday, which is unusual from the point of view, but that's how the holiday really kind of came in this year on that one. So acreages, wow, there's still a lot of consternation here in the industry. The surveys we received, and one of them was put out by Allendale this week. Uh, that's not really getting the kind of boost we probably need in soybean plantings. The survey they had was at 2.2 million up. That's higher than the 1.6 million that we were seeing back from some trade ideas a month or so ago. But the big question is that we need to have probably 3 to 3.5 million less corn acres because we've got this 2 billion carryover. We really don't need, uh, you know, only the estimate that came out of the Allendale numbers was 1.2 million. We need to have that a lot closer, as I said, up to 3.5 or more. And so I think that's an interesting twist here. We're going to have to see if the market is going to encourage producers out here with steady to higher soybeans or take corn down. The biggest thing about taking corn down, we're really at or just a little bit of U.S. loan values, and that so they're really it's not much luck to discourage people to say, "Oh, I'm not." If you're at loan, you're gonna you're not going to discourage me more to not plant corn. And I think that's the big problem right now is that the soybeans prices need to have some further strength. Uh, that's an interesting twist out there on as we look forward here and these numbers ahead. And so maybe that's going to be a feature. We do have some general resistance here and the nearby price around $12. We popped up there. And I did suggest last week to maybe move up your exports, or excuse me, your monthly say your yearly sales, I should say, up to 65% in the $12 to 12 15 20 zone at this point. And so I still feel that's a good move. There might be a situation though, I might need to see. I want to hold back that last third of the crop to see what might happen later on, because there's could be a possibility that we could see that price still get higher in the mid to high ends of $12 yet this spring, depending on how the results in South America's crops finalize out.
All right, we'll tune in next week. Thank you, Jerry.
You bet. You have a good evening. And at this point, hope everyone's college basketball teams have a great NCAAs.